Hello beautiful beings, and welcome back to my channel. In this video I will be walking you through the easiest way to understand the houses, how you can understand the houses in your birth chart and what that says about you and your chart. So the houses in a birth chart represent the areas of life. You can think of it as like the planets are kind of like teachers. The houses are that classroom that the teachers are teaching in, and the signs is kind of like the sign is kind of like the curriculum that that teacher is teaching you. So for example, if you are an Aries rising, your first house is ruled by Aries. And if you have a planet there, say Mars for example, say you have Mars and Aries in the first house, Mars comes to teach you the energy of drive, of sexual passion, of really taking action. And in the sign of Aries, it also teaches those things. It just kind of amplifies that teaching. And this will teach you this through the lens of this area of your life, which the first house represents identity. And I have more about each house and what each house meaning is broken down on my blog and on my website. You can check that out at understandastrology.me. But for the generality of this video, keeping it brief and simple, the first house represents identity. So this Mars and Aries in the first house means you maybe have a tendency towards aggression and taking action in a lot of cases because that is who you identify as yourself to be. So this is kind of the area of life where that will show up for you, is your identity and how you express yourself to others, how you're seen in the world, and how you really are around people when you first meet them. Your first impressions will maybe be, wow, he's intense, he's passionate, he or she is aggressive, those types of things. They're really good at taking action, they're really business oriented, all of those types of Mars and Aries archetypal things in the first house, because again, that is your identity. The first house represents identity. You can kind of apply this to each house. So you can kind of think of each house as each sign applied to a place. So we'll take this on. Aries represents identity. It represents the self. That is the first house. The second house is ruled by Taurus traditionally. Taurus is all things money, material possessions, and self-worth. So you can relate that to a place in your life as, how do you think of yourself as being worthy? What are your finances like? What are your material possessions like? That's what the second house represents. The third house is ruled by Gemini, which represents communication and perception. So the third house is where we look at what is our perception? How do we communicate? What are our thought patterns like? How are our thought processes like? And what that has to say about our mental state, represented by the third house as an area of life. The third house represents our mental state. The fourth house is ruled by Cancer and represents our home, Cancer and type things. It represents the divine feminine. So it represents how you show up in that area of your life and being those things. So how do you show up in your home? What do you need in your home to feel secure? Those types of things. It also represents the subconscious. So what is in your subconscious will be in your fourth house. The fifth house is ruled by Leo and represents creativity, passion, and the inner child. So this is the house of also of romance. So this house will be showing you and applying this to an area of your life. Think of these things as like a place. So the fifth house is your inner child. It is how you show up in romance. It is how you express your creative gifts and passions. The sixth house is ruled by Virgo and represents work. It represents the work that we do for money and how we show up to be of service. It also represents our health, our well-being, and our routine. So this again can be applied to the area of your life. How is your routine? How is your health? How is your work life? Those are all the things that the sixth house rules. The seventh house, bringing in the energy of sister signs here, which I just filmed a video on. You can check that out in the description box below if you haven't seen that yet. We come into opposites now. So the first house is opposite the seventh house. And the seventh house is ruled by Libra, which is the sister sign of Aries, and the seventh house rules all Libra type things. So the first house again represents self-identity. The seventh house represents the opposite of that. It represents relationships. It represents marriage. It represents how we show up to the other, how we relate to the other, and how we show up in our relationships. Again, apply this energy to places in your life, how we show up to others. That's the seventh house. The eighth house is the opposite of the second house, which Again, the second house represents material possessions, self-worth. The eighth house is other people's resources and intimacy, and also sexuality. So how do we show up? It's ruled by Scorpio. So how do we show up within our sexuality? How do we show up within our, our intimacy with other people? How do we show up in vulnerability? How do we allow ourselves to be supported by others, or to handle other people's resources? That is the eighth house. The eighth house also represents death. The ninth house is ruled by Sagittarius. Again, opposite the third house, represents Gemini. The third house represents Gemini. The ninth house is opposite the third house and Gemini, so it is Sagittarius ruled. The ninth house gives us insight into travel, international travel, higher learning, higher studies, our belief systems, our philosophies of life. And again, this is applied to the area of your life. So think of how you relate to travel, how you relate to higher education, how you relate to learning, how you relate to questioning your belief systems, and really changing those areas of your life with the ninth house. The 10th house is opposite the 4th house, which the 10th house is ruled by Capricorn and represents our career. The midheaven typically lies in the 10th house, which is our highest potential. How are you meant to show up in the world? How are you meant to be seen in the public eye? How are you meant to be known as in the world? What is your reputation? That is the things that the 10th house rules. It is also indicative of your career. How are you meant to show up in your career? How are you meant to be known in your career and by the people that see you as this kind of authority within your career and your field of study? That is the 10th house. The 11th house is ruled by Aquarius. It is opposite the 5th house, which is ruled by Leo. The 11th house, ruled by Aquarius, represents our community. It represents our friend groups. It represents the collective. It also represents social media and how you're meant to show up on social media, which I have a video about that I'll link in the description box below. It represents the ways that we're here to innovate, the place in our life that we're here to really show up in innovation and transform, to transmute. The 12th house is ruled by Pisces, which is opposite the 6th house, ruled by Virgo. The 12th house, ruled by Pisces, represents death. It represents death as well as rebirth. It represents past lives. It represents our karma. It also represents what's hidden. So if you have a lot of placements here in your chart in the 12th house, they're going to be kind of hidden. They're going to be not very obvious. Because again, the 12th house kind of represents like what's hidden. And applying this to the area of your life, it's where do you take on energy? Where do you allow yourself to really be intuitive and feel into things and kind of like take on from other people? It is opposite the 6th house, which the 6th house is being of service and working. The 12th house is kind of about giving to others in the ways that will heal us and the collective. So I hope that was helpful and gave you some insight into the houses and how you can really simplify understanding the houses and really be able to apply this to your chart in a really easy to digest way. So until next time, much love.